Hello, I'm Phantom Mitchell, and today we delve into one of the most chilling true crime cases in modern history. The murder of Janelle Cruz, a young woman whose life was brutally cut short in 1986, shocked a community and left an unsolved mystery that would haunt her family for decades. With new evidence emerging years later, the investigation took a startling turn, leading us to ask who was truly responsible for her death. Stay tuned as we uncover the eerie details of this heartbreaking case. It was the summer of 1986, a peaceful evening in Irvine, California. Janelle Cruz, only 18 years old, was at home alone in her parents' house. She had spent the day out with friends, a normal day for a high school senior. However, as night fell, the quiet suburb was about to be shattered by an unspeakable act. That night, Janelle would never make it to morning. The murder would forever change the lives of those closest to her and send shockwaves through the community. The following morning, Janelle's mother, returning home from a trip, found her daughter's lifeless body in her bedroom. She was horrified to discover that Janelle had been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered. There was no sign of forced entry, and the family's home appeared undisturbed, suggesting that the killer might have been someone familiar with the house. But the murder itself was shocking, brutal, violent, and seemingly random. What could have driven someone to commit such an atrocity against a young woman who was loved by everyone? As investigators arrived at the scene, they found little physical evidence that could directly point to the killer. There were no fingerprints or obvious signs of struggle. The case initially baffled them. At first, they considered a random attack, a crime of opportunity. But as they dug deeper, they discovered a chilling detail that would change the direction of the investigation forever: a footprint found near the back door. It wasn't just any footprint, it was a distinctive one. This would become one of the few key pieces of evidence that could lead them to the truth. The footprint, found just outside the back door, led detectives to question whether the killer had known Janelle. There was no sign of an intruder, but the footprint indicated that someone had been near the house prior to the murder. Was it a stalker? Or perhaps an ex-boyfriend? Investigators started to look into Janelle's past relationships and anyone who might have had a motive to harm her. But each lead seemed to end in a dead end. With no eyewitnesses and no immediate suspects, the case began to feel like an insurmountable puzzle. As the investigation continued, detectives started to focus on individuals who were close to Janelle. They questioned family members, friends, and even co-workers. One name came up repeatedly during the interviews: Steve, a local man who had previously been in a relationship with Janelle. While there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime, his presence at the scene the night before raised suspicions. Could he have returned to settle a score, or was his involvement merely a coincidence? Detectives couldn't ignore the possibility that the answer lay closer to home than they had originally thought. In the weeks following the murder, investigators discovered something unsettling. Steve had been obsessively reaching out to Janelle, attempting to rekindle their relationship, despite the fact that she had already moved on. He had a history of possessive behavior, and this obsessive nature began to paint a disturbing picture of his possible involvement. Still, there was no concrete evidence linking him to the crime. But the closer the investigators looked, the more they began to wonder, was this crime the result of a twisted obsession, or was there something more sinister at play? Fast forward 30 years. In 2016, advances in forensic technology allowed investigators to revisit the case. DNA testing had evolved significantly, and with new tools at their disposal, detectives decided to re-examine the evidence. The key breakthrough came when they analyzed semen found at the scene of the crime, which had been preserved in the original case files. Forensic experts were able to extract a DNA profile, which did not match Steve. This revelation threw the case into disarray. If Steve was not the killer, then who was? The investigation took a shocking turn when the DNA was compared against a criminal database. The results were startling. The DNA belonged to Raymond Davis, a man with a violent criminal past. Davis had been previously convicted of sexual assault, but had never been linked to Janelle's murder. How could he have slipped through the cracks for so long, and what connection did he have to Janelle? This discovery was a game changer, and it raised a host of new questions that no one had anticipated. With the new DNA match, investigators immediately set out to find Raymond Davis. However, they quickly discovered that he had been living under a different identity for many years. He had managed to evade detection, despite his criminal history. How had he stayed hidden for so long? Was he part of a larger network of individuals committing similar crimes? As detectives worked to track him down, they unearthed more unsettling details about his life and his potential connections to other unsolved cases. As they dug deeper into Raymond Davis's past, investigators uncovered a chilling pattern. Davis had a history of violent crime, including assaults and robberies, all of which were eerily similar to the way Janelle had been murdered. Was Janelle just one victim in a series of attacks by Davis, or had he acted alone that fateful night? The more they uncovered, the more it seemed like Davis had been a predator lurking in the shadows, waiting for his next victim. What had motivated him to kill Janelle, specifically? Was it a crime of opportunity, or was there a deeper, more personal motive? As the search for Raymond Davis escalated, law enforcement uncovered more about his criminal background. He had been linked to several unsolved assaults in the region, though nothing ever led directly to him being charged for any of them. Was Davis a serial offender who had avoided capture due to his ability to evade the authorities? His pattern of violent behavior suggested he was capable of much more. Investigators were left to question, was the brutal murder of Janelle just another chapter in his history of unchecked violence, or did something about her make this crime particularly personal? When investigators reviewed Davis's past, they discovered a disturbing possibility. Davis had lived in the same neighborhood as Janelle and had even been seen in the area around the time of her murder. This connection raised new, terrifying questions. Was it possible that he had been stalking Janelle long before her death? Did she unknowingly cross paths with him in the months leading up to that night? As they retraced his movements and linked him to various locations, it became clear that Davis had been operating in the shadows, and Janelle might have been one of his many targets. Davis's silence about his crimes had always been a point of frustration for investigators. He had never spoken about his past, nor had he ever expressed any remorse for his actions. His ability to remain under the radar for so many years was unsettling. Even as they closed in on him, it became clear that Davis was no ordinary criminal. He was calculating, methodical, and seemingly unafraid of the consequences. What made him so confident? Did he feel untouchable? Or was there a more insidious reason why he had eluded capture for so long? The breakthrough finally came when Raymond Davis was apprehended in 2016, living in a quiet suburb far from where his crimes had originally taken place. His capture was not without resistance, and it took an elaborate operation by local law enforcement to bring him into custody. As he was taken into custody, his calm demeanor unnerved everyone around him. Was he finally ready to confess? Or had he simply become so accustomed to living a life of deceit and violence that he no longer cared? During his first interrogation, Davis remained silent. Despite the mounting evidence against him, he refused to speak about his involvement in Janelle's murder. He seemed almost uninterested in defending himself, as if he already accepted his fate. The detectives pressed him on the DNA evidence and his past crimes, but Davis remained unyielding. His refusal to engage in any meaningful conversation only deepened the mystery. Why would he stay silent when everything pointed to him? Was he hiding a larger secret, or was his indifference simply the result of years of evading justice? After hours of interrogation, Raymond Davis finally spoke. He admitted to killing Janelle Cruz, but his explanation was chilling and disturbing. He claimed that he had been watching her for weeks before the murder, and on the night of the crime, he simply couldn't resist the urge to act. There was no clear reason for his actions, no personal vendetta, no emotional trigger. It was as if Janelle had been nothing more than the unfortunate victim of his twisted desires. Davis's lack of remorse during his confession sent shivers down the spine of everyone in the room. This was not the confession of a man who felt guilty, it was the cold, calculated admission of a predator who had been waiting for the right moment to strike. For Janelle's family, the confession was both a relief and a source of deep sorrow. They had lived with the uncertainty of her death for 30 long years, and now, finally, they had answers. But those answers only brought more pain. The brutal nature of the crime, coupled with the horrifying indifference shown by Davis, was almost too much to bear. Her parents and siblings were left to grapple with the reality that their beloved daughter and sister had been taken from them in such a senseless and violent manner. The sense of justice, while important, couldn't undo the years of heartache they had endured. Though Janelle's case was finally closed, it left a lasting impact on the community and the victims' families. It served as a reminder of the darkness that can exist in the most ordinary places. The fact that Davis had been able to evade justice for so long was a testament to the failures of the criminal justice system and the danger of allowing violent offenders to remain at large. But Janelle's story, and the tireless work of the investigators who eventually solved her case, also served as a beacon of hope for families facing similar tragedies. It showed that even after decades, justice could be served and closure could be found. The case remained dormant for many years, but the breakthrough came with advances in DNA technology. In the 1980s, forensic science was not as advanced as it is today, and many pieces of evidence went unexplored to limitations in testing. However, with the advent of more sophisticated DNA analysis, previously overlooked evidence was re-examined. The semen found at the crime scene, long preserved in the case files, was tested again, and this time, the DNA was matched to Raymond Davis. This revelation brought the case back to the forefront of the investigation, rekindling hopes that the truth would finally come to light. As technology continued to evolve, so did the methods used by law enforcement to solve cold cases. The use of forensic databases, genetic genealogy, and advanced DNA profiling allowed investigators to revisit decades-old cases with fresh eyes. The case of Janelle Cruz was a prime example of how technology could bridge the gap between the past and the present. Without these advancements, it's possible that Davis's identity would have never been uncovered, and Janelle's case would have remained unsolved. Even after Raymond Davis's capture and confession, the road to closure was not an easy one for Janelle's family. Despite knowing who had murdered their daughter, there remained a painful void that could never be filled. The years of uncertainty, the unanswered questions, and the emotional scars left by the brutal murder could not simply be erased by the knowledge of the killer's identity. The trial that followed was a deeply emotional experience, as the Cruz family finally confronted the man who had taken their beloved Janelle's life. Each testimony, each piece of evidence, reminded them of the unimaginable pain they had endured for so long. Raymond Davis's trial was one of the most heavily followed legal proceedings in the region. The prosecution meticulously laid out the case, presenting DNA evidence, witness statements, and Davis's chilling confession. But despite the overwhelming evidence, Davis maintained his indifference, showing no remorse for his actions. His defense team tried to argue that he was a product of his environment and that he should not be held fully accountable for his crimes. But the jury, after hearing the harrowing details of Janelle's murder, was not swayed. The verdict was swift, and Raymond Davis was convicted of first-degree murder. As investigators delved deeper into the psychology of Raymond Davis, they were confronted with unsettling findings. Davis had no apparent motive for murdering Janelle, no personal connection, no obvious trigger for his violent outburst. Experts in criminal psychology were puzzled by his lack of remorse. Some speculated that he may have viewed his crime as a form of control or power, seeking to dominate someone who was seemingly innocent and unsuspecting. His cold, detached demeanor during the trial was indicative of a personality disorder, one that lacked empathy and had no regard for human life. In the aftermath of the trial, investigators revisited the crime scene, looking for any additional clues that might have been overlooked during the original investigation. They found a few minor details that didn't quite add up. A broken window in the living room, which had initially been attributed to a random break-in, now seemed more deliberate. There was also the fact that no neighbors had heard anything unusual on the night of the murder, even though Davis had been in and out of the area during the time frame. These small discrepancies only fueled the suspicion that there was more to the story than initially thought. Could there have been more involved in this crime than just Davis? Were there others who helped him cover up his tracks? In the months following the conviction, a chilling realization dawned on investigators. The neighbors who lived near the Cruz family had been disturbingly quiet throughout the entire investigation. There were whispers that some of them had known Raymond Davis, or at least recognized him from the area. But why hadn't anyone come forward earlier? Were they too afraid of him to speak up? Or did they know something they were too scared to reveal? As police dug deeper, they found several neighbors who had been reluctant to cooperate, citing fear or uncertainty. This silence added a layer of mystery to the case. What had they known, and why did they keep it to themselves? As investigators worked to understand Davis's history, they began to wonder if Janelle was his first victim. While no direct evidence linked him to other crimes, there were suspicions that his violent tendencies may have extended beyond her murder. Could there be more victims hidden in Davis's past, victims who had never come forward or whose cases had been closed as unsolved? Investigators re-examined cold cases from around the region, looking for patterns that might indicate a link to Davis, although they found no definitive proof. The possibility that he had been active for much longer than anyone had realized continued to haunt the investigation. One of the most perplexing aspects of the case was the lack of a clear motive. Unlike many other violent crimes, there was no apparent reason why Davis targeted Janelle. He had no personal connection to her, and there was no indication that they had ever met before the night of her death. The lack of motive left investigators with even more questions than answers. Was this simply an act of random violence, or was there something about Janelle that made her the perfect target for Davis's twisted desires? As experts analyzed Davis's behavior, they speculated that his need for control had played a significant role in his decision to kill her. Perhaps Janelle's life, so full of potential, represented everything he could never have. The resolution of Janelle Cruz's case had a profound impact on cold case investigations nationwide. It was a shining example of how perseverance, technology, and modern forensic science could bring closure to even the most difficult cases. The use of DNA evidence, which had been a crucial element in solving the crime, became a standard tool for law enforcement agencies everywhere. The case also highlighted the importance of revisiting old evidence, even when it seemed like there was no hope of solving the case. Janelle's murder, which had been an open wound in her family's life for over 3 decades, was finally brought to justice, and that brought hope to countless other families still searching for answers. Though Janelle Cruz's life was tragically cut short, her story became a symbol of hope for those fighting for justice. Her case reminded the public that no matter how much time passes, justice is always worth pursuing. Her family, though forever marked by the loss, took solace in knowing that her story was not forgotten and that her killer was held accountable for his actions. Janelle's legacy would live on, not just in the memories of her loved ones, but also in the hearts of others who had been touched by her story. She became a beacon of courage in the face of unspeakable tragedy. As we conclude the story of Janelle Cruz, her case serves as a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is always hope for justice. No matter how much time passes, the truth will eventually come to light, and those who commit heinous acts cannot escape the consequences. But the fight for justice is never truly over. For every family still searching for answers, there is still hope, still a chance for the truth to emerge. If you want to help continue the fight for justice for victims like Janelle, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more cases like hers. The truth matters, and together, we can make sure it's never forgotten.